Beyond Prompts, Documentation in the AI Works Ecosystem. I am Sheba and I'll be your host for today's session. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Marzena Cudecka. So Marzena is focused on creating clear, structured documentation for complex software systems. She has experience building and scaling knowledge sharing and aligning documentation with product and engineering workflows. She also works on the development of a whole knowledge hub and is particularly interested in how AI is reshaping documentation practices and team collaboration. Today, she'll share how technical documentation is evolving in an AI-enabled world, what this means for technical writers and cross-functional teams, and why structured, high-quality documentation is becoming the foundation for both human and AI-driven workflows. If you have any questions during the webinar, then feel free to drop them in the Q&A box and we'll make sure to address them towards the end of the session. With that, I'll hand it over to Marzena. The stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Shiba, for the introduction, and I hope you can hear me well. And yeah, today we'll talk about the documentation in the AI work ecosystem, but I don't mean like, preparing the prompts or like working only with AI, but I mean the whole ecosystem in which we exist as writers in the software development. So I wanted to start with just a bit of a background, but yeah, you already introduced me, so thank you for that. I can add to it that I'm based in Poland. I'm a former teacher, and I actually moved into the technical documentation 10 years ago. I currently work as a doc lead, and I'm really passionate about how documentation is produced and how it works together with the other teams. So I will start with just giving a short overview. I think that when we think about documentation and when we think how it's structured in the companies, we all know that the documentation teams have always managed like the content quality. I mean, it was always about describing the product, how it works and what it gives to the customers. And it's always the documentation teams who take the ownership of actually what goes to the customers. We care about the accuracy and trust. And now that's also still valid, but together with AI, we have some additional points that we always need to address and we need to take care into account. And these are topics like about tracking AI assisted changes, who takes the accountability, what is the autonomy of AI, so how much permissions we give it. And the topic that I particularly find interesting is the knowledge preservation between people. So how much knowledge we gain and how much knowledge we actually lose when we use AI. But that will come later as well. So when we talk about documentation, we know that in the past documentation was like gathered by the writers and then produced by them. But then with AI that started not so long ago or long ago, we have some assistance, so we can prompt the agents to actually prepare the drafts for us. We can ask them to assist in our workflow. And that actually gives a huge productivity boost because we have less manual work. And, I'm really happy that I don't have to, create the tables from scratch, do some styling corrections and things like that. It's really, really helpful. But now it changes again. So now we have the invisible AI assistants. And this is a bit different because, we configure the agents and AI to work with us in our ecosystem, but it's no longer just prompting. It's automated use cases, and that gives even more productivity boost. But it also means a lot of more content that we need to review and that we are producing. So also looking at it from the writer's perspective, the traditional workflow would be that we gather the knowledge. So we go to the developers, we talk with product managers, we attend plannings, different meetings, and so on. That then we would review and publish the documentation. Then the flow changed a bit, and we would also gather the knowledge, but we would prompt AI to help us, and then we would write, summarize, and review again. Now the emerging workflow is a bit different because we no longer have to gather the knowledge, and I think, to be honest, that this is a huge difference. Basically, because that the knowledge is gathered for us. So if we have agents configured across our system, then they gather the knowledge, and then we work together. And what is really interesting is that when we look at work with AI, it's not only about the AI that we use as technical writers, but it's also about AI that is used among the teams. So it means that it actually enters the workflow even before we start working on the documentation. It means that the developers use the AI to create change logs, to create API references, all pull request descriptions. And then we have product managers. So this is about feature summaries, about having acceptance criteria in the right place, and very often about preparing release notes. And we have support teams. So the support teams very often use AI for creating summaries of tickets raised by customers. And those tickets also very often become parts of the documentation. And now what the documentation team does with all of that, we take the drafts, we rewrite and structure and review once again. The additional part here is that the agents, the whole AI in the system is also connected with different tools that we use. I think most of us use GitHub, Jira, or communication tools like Slack or Microsoft Teams, anything that you use and that you love. And it's also connected with the company standards, which are probably written down somewhere there, and with the style guides. So this comes all together, and depending on the configuration of your workflow, the content that we get for working for the documentation starts very early in this process. So it starts within the source for the content and not only at the end with us. And yes, what happens now? So embedded AI agents produce content based on the information available across all the connected tools. And also depending on the different permissions, they have different levels of autonomy, and they use the content that they are allowed to use. And I just wanted to highlight here that it's very important to actually review and understand where the AI comes from and what source it is given, and how much or how many times we have to review it. And I actually left this slide on purpose here because of course, I asked AI to help me out with the visualization of the presentation, and I checked it many times, and only today in the morning I saw that it actually has 2 mistakes in the slides, like double wording or some typos. So it's like a very nice reminder of how much effort we need to put in to work with AI in a proper way and to review what it gives us. And what the whole process, the whole ecosystem means for the documentation is that we have a lot of good stuff, like really a lot, and it's a faster content creation and updates. We have less manual formatting, a lot of less restructuring, repetitive work. I mean, this is all done for us. We don't have to struggle with that. The thing is that sometimes when we get large amounts of information, like for the doc input, then sometimes it is actually difficult to process when you have different parts of content in different scattered places. But then with AI, we can do some faster processing, and it can help us to put all the pieces together. The additional thing is that it's very easy to switch between formats. Sometimes we use Markdown, sometimes we have to put something in a graph or a JSON. And AI is great here because it helps us a lot, and it's very easier to transform the content into diagrams and so on. We have a lot of support during drafting, reviewing, or even maintenance of the documentation. Like, I know you want to change a style in the whole documentation platform, and you can do that in a matter of few minutes, actually. Better scalability, but this I believe is a bit tricky because we can work faster and we can scale, but also we get more content to work on. And that brings us to the challenging part. So, we have more AI generated content that enters the documentation process. And what I mean here that we have so many changes that it suggests to do that we spend a lot of time evaluating and validating the content. And it's really sometimes hard to understand where the information originated. I mean, where the content comes from, and what was the trigger for the AI change. That of course also means more effort spent on reviewing. I wrote here rather than investigating, but actually it's also investigating, but in a different way. Like before, we would gather the knowledge on our own and we would prepare for the documentation. Now, when we have the content more or less ready, we need to investigate and test from the other side. So we need to check if this is correct, what we have, and we should probably test it then. But we are also risking the missing business context, so the information from the team. And that actually all depends on how AI is configured and where it enters the documentation process. Okay, so for me, the huge question mark is the hidden problem of traceability and confidence. So again, we can ask the same questions. We can ask, how to keep track of the AI-assisted changes. How do we know that actually the content is accurate? Because if we don't know the source of the doc input of the content that we work on, then we cannot take responsibility for it. So we need to know the origin of the doc input, what has changed, why, and if it's really reflected already in the product. So we need to be sure always that the product change is already there. And for example, not that it is waiting for deployment, right? And if what was described is really how it works in production. Now, the risk of meaningless content is another thing, because I think that this is a common thing, that the expectations of the technical documentation is that it will be always clear and focused. And we always need some nice introduction or business guides and so on, but it should also answer real questions with examples of some customer use cases. And actually it is created to assist users and to solve user problems. So to solve the problems, it also, of course, has to provide some context. But the main thing is that it really should create value and solve issues for the customers. Now, with the documentation that is prepared by AI, we still have it, but we also risk the fact that the content can be very long and repetitive. So sometimes the same things are explained in different sections in the same way, and the content is scattered, and it sounds convincing, but it very often just explains the obvious things. But I guess this is all just a matter of teaching AI how to work with us and what we expect from it. But we just need to make sure that it doesn't just create volume; it actually creates the volume. And now the responsibility. So this is actually a part that should be taken into consideration by every team in software development. So, of course, the product teams, like product managers, they own the so-called product truth. So they are the ones who can confirm how the features work, how the product looks like. And the subject matter experts, they can do the technical validation, and this is on their table. And then the documentation teams who put it all together and are actually responsible for the content quality and the publication process. So at the end, we are accountable for what goes out. And there's, of course, a question of legal and compliance things. So we need to make sure that the AI tools that we work with are the valid tools, let's say so, and that the permissions that they have are the ones that are acceptable for us and for the companies. And here also comes the question of documentation as a customer contract. So because documentation I see it as a representation of the product for people, right? So if you want to learn about the product, if you want to actually get to know it, and you want to check what features it has, you go to the documentation, because that's what documentation does. So it influences a lot of adoption decisions, the implementation decisions. It sets a lot of product expectations, and also it has impact on the support requests, either higher or lower volumes. And of course, it builds customer trust. So it's a kind of quality that proves that the product is a good one. And here is the challenge again, that the expectations might not be met, and there might be more support issues if we don't put the content that is ready to use for the customers, or the content that is of good quality. Then we also run into trust problems, and that actually brings the brand we work on to some troubles. And so what are the steps to take? I think, like, to be on the safe side when working with AI, we need to first work with the teams. So with the developers, QA, product managers, everyone in the company, also go to market, because they are the stakeholders. And we need to understand the whole flow, how they work with AI and how they prepare the content that they give us. So, for example, how do they use AI in engineering to produce the technical doc input? I mean, what source they give to AI, and how they validate that it is done in a good shape. The same for support and design teams, and at which point the AI generated output actually enters the documentation process. And I believe that it actually enters it right away, because then we work with the content. And yeah, the source material for the documentation, so where it all started and what is the truth about the product. It's very good to create common patterns for the teams. So it needs to be understandable between the people where the human review should take place, and the so-called human in the loop. We need to have clear definitions of what should be documented before the content reaches the customers. And I know that this sounds quite obvious, but this is a standard thing for people as technical writers, but it's not always a standard for AI that uses content for other content creation. So we should actually configure the AI with skills and rules that actually teach it how to do that. And we should agree on how AI input is prepared and maintained later on. And of course, define how to store the content and how it's shared. And on the other side, it's just to repeat once again that AI generates content automatically. So it needs reliable input. So the developers are responsible to make sure that AI uses the input that is correct, because what we give to AI, we actually then get it back in the text. And I added a bullet point here about the documentation requirements, that they should be part of user stories, tasks, and feature definitions. And this is nothing new. This was already always present in documentation, but we need to take care of it from the AI perspective, right? That this is not only just people writing filling up the requirements, but it's also stuff that should be ready for AI. And this ready for AI, as a definition of done for a dev task, I don't mean that we should maybe label the task or something like this, but I mean that the teams should keep in mind that what they produce and what they give to others to work on, to QA or to technical writers, this is actually ready for AI. I mean, it can be ready either for their agents to work on and to prepare, for example, change logs and API references, or if they use AI for doc input, what they give should be ready to take. So they need to make sure that the content they give to the agents is actually valid one and it doesn't contain any bugs and so on. And from the documentation side, we need to make sure that we understand the flow, but we should also map the AI assistant documentation workflow throughout the whole company system. So we need to identify the visible and invisible AI touchpoints, so that it's just easier to understand where the content comes from and how to work with that. We just need to see it to be able to review it later on, because otherwise we risk a lot of mess and content that is not valid. We can prepare the input for AI, and I think that is very important, that AI is actually fed with the style guides, with the terminology, content standards. We can create some rules how it should work within documentation. We can prepare skills, everything that is happening at the moment. We need to decide where we store reusable context, and not just, we can have a prompt library, of course, but it's not only about prompts, but about configuring the whole ecosystem. And most of all, we need to decide what information AI should or should not use, because that is, if you connect, for example, with some communication channels, there are for sure information that is okay to move to public documentation process, but then there are a lot of information as well that should stay only internal. So the real challenge here is to make sure that AI has the right permissions and it can only use what should be used. And actually the last points from this topic is that if we want to make our documentation ecosystem AI ready, the control points are really, really important. So we require source-backed drafts. First of all, we need to also define the approval ownership. So who takes the responsibility at the end to approve what was changed? It's really good to have review rules for AI-assisted content, so that it's not, of course, that probably depends on the company you work for, but if we talk about AI-assisted content, if it should be still reviewed by a human or by other AI, that depends on your decisions. And I think also it's better to use lightweight documentation checklists, so don't make it too complicated, but easy to understand. And the improvement of visibility. So if we can in any way label AI assisted content, that's already helpful, because that helps us to track the changes and also to understand what's going on. So in the end, it's us who take the ownership of the changes, after all, of the pull request, and of the maintenance responsibilities. So what I want to actually highlight, that it's, using AI is one thing, but we can never treat it like a just tool that, I mean, we should not treat it as a separate team member, because sometimes when we have AI configured in the ecosystem and it does its own work, it feels like this is like another team member that does the job. But actually, it's just a tool that we use, and it's on our account how we use it and what we allow it to do. And all in all, it's the documentation team that provide the content to the customers and that take the responsibility. And with that, actually, I think I will close the topic. But I was really curious to get your feedback and to hear from you how you see it within your companies, because this is, there are no answers that are always 100%, because everyone is learning how to work with AI and how to configure best, how to use it. So I would really like to hear from you what are your opinions about that.
Thank you, Marzena. And that's a wrap for today's session. Once again, a huge thank you to you for walking us through the topic. And of course, if you have more questions or want to learn more about Document 360, then feel free to reach out to us. We'll be back soon with another session. Until then, see you next time.